Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name's Kevin, this is minisbykev, and I'm a miniaturist living in New England. Ignore the bananas in the background. Should have moved those. I missed last week. I know I missed last week. It's been like, my day job has been nuts lately, and so I apologize for missing last week. As you can tell, I need a haircut. Everything in life is just chaotic right now. I wanted to get a video out this week and I knew that I needed to make something simple again. Last week's simple though, if you watched last week's video, you know that the last week's simple did not turn out right. It was a nightmare. But this week, I decided to go back to the scale I know and love, as you probably saw from the thumbnail, and went back to 12th scale because I feel more comfortable working in 12th scale than I do 24th or any other scale for that matter. But I needed to do something kind of easier that I could get done quicker, but I also wanted to practice my miniature painting skills. I'm not good at painting, and I can say that, I'm just not. I'm trying to get better at it though, so I needed to do a project that I could do some fine line techniques in miniature. Does that make sense? So this week I decided to make a checkerboard. I don't know. I just thought like the lines I could practice, you know, and so that's what I came up with. So there's nothing else to say about that. Let's turn the camera around, get started, and yeah. The first step for all my miniatures is exactly the same. I get out this notebook that I do all my brainstorming in and all my like number work, and I sketch out and label what I'm doing. So here I am labeling what I'm gonna make, and then I had to figure out the measurements. So I looked up a couple different checkerboard sizes, and I kind of went like with the average between a couple of popular ones, and then I wrote down the size of what they are in real scale, which I guess is just life, and then I used the converter tool that I use for a lot of my miniatures that does the conversion for me, because when you're working with things that are less than equal numbers, like 12, 24, when you're divided by 12, it gets confusing. I've said this in a lot of videos, but the measuring system we use is very confusing when you get down to like a smaller scale. So I use the converter calculator, which I always link below when I talk about it, and then I write down the different sizes that it needs to be once it's been shrunk down. These boxes are very tiny. It got into decimal points, which I'm not a fan of. When you get into decimal points on 12th scale, my brain starts just going haywire. I did at one point question if the box was too big, so I made a smaller version next to it. And in the end, I do like the smaller version better, so I ended up going with that one just because I don't know what it was. I found the average online of what like a normal checkerboard is, and for some reason when it shrunk down, I just thought it looked too big. But throughout this whole process, I do think the checkerboard looks big, and I know that it's the correct size based on like converting scales, but it just always looks a little too big for me. After I decided what square to do, I had to do all the converting of all the different box sizes, and then I just drew the grid in onto this checkerboard. I did notice that a lot of these checkerboards had kind of like a framing around the outside of the actual grid, so I wanted to include that as well, which is what I'm doing here. Again, this was like a 1/16 of an inch or maybe an 1/8 of an inch. It was very, very tiny, and it's hard to work with, but I did make the frame around it because I just liked the way it looked. It kind of framed it, for a lack of a better word. I had this scrap piece of mat board that I thought I could use, so here I am just making sure it's the right size, and then I cut it down with my X-Acto blade. However, I ran into an issue. I spent about 25-30 minutes trying to make sure that all the different sides of the mat board were straight, because I want the checkerboard to be even on all sides and make a perfect square. And like I said, I spent about 30 minutes on this, I think, and before I realized that I had cut the mat board incorrectly at one point. It had ripped a little bit on one side, and I just knew that when I set it on a surface, you would be able to see it. It would be obvious, and I didn't want that. So here I am just showing you that I cannot use this piece because of the rip, and it was unfortunate because I had sunk some time into this already, but I wanted this to look nice, and so I had to start over. However, what I did is I measured out a perfect square, and then I took out my paper cutter, and I knew the paper cutter would not be strong enough to cut through mat board. It's just not. I have a more heavy duty one that I've used in previous videos, but I only have this one on me. So what I did is I actually sliced the top layer, so that way I knew exactly where it needed to be cut, and as you can see here, it cut, but not all the way through. So then I could take my X-Acto knife and cut the remainder of the way through the mat board. So if you ever want to use this technique, you can use it. It just might dull your blade a little bit, but it does show you exactly where to cut in a straight line. Next, I drew on the frame that I had made in the 1/16 or 1/8 border around the checkerboard, and then I made these little tiny dashes where I knew the grid needed to be while drawing in the checkerboard. So something I struggle with is actually drawing straight lines. Even when using my ruler, I sometimes I get crooked lines. I don't know what it is. My hand probably slips a little bit, And my arrows, my lines are not always straight. What I do is I stand them both up rather than lay them flat on the table, because if they're standing up straight, I know that there's no room for error as long as one side of the map board is completely flat and straight. You do have to make sure it's completely flat and straight, cut on one side. So I usually use like the edge of a piece of map board, and then I will stand them both up because it really does work standing them up. I've never had a problem. If you struggle like me to get straight lines, try the technique. It does help. It's not always perfect, I guess, because if you're leaning the map board and the ruler, it may come out. No, now that I'm saying that, no, I've never had that issue either. So this always works for me. So if you have trouble with straight lines, try this. It really works. Here I am just showing you what it looks like once all my grid work is done. When it came time to make the checker pieces, I pulled out my paper clay, which I bought a long time ago now. It feels like over a month. And I was actually surprised that this is not dried out. Putting it in a baggie does work. I don't know why. I assumed this would be hard as a rock, and it's still going strong. These are the checkers that I was kind of going for. I wanted them to be simple, not too ornate, just flat little discs. My original bright idea was to roll this out into like a snake shape until it was the right diameter that I needed for the checkers. However, what I failed to think about is that this clay doesn't hold up very well when you're trying to cut it at this size. It is very, very tiny. I think this is maybe not, I don't know. This is so tiny. I don't know the diameter now off the top of my head. I have it written down somewhere. It was like 0.1375 or something like that. So when I tried cutting it, instead of cutting into cute little discs, it just smashed. And so I had to kind of improvise from there. The way I went about fixing this is instead of using the snake shape and cutting it up, I would pull off little pieces of clay, roll it into a ball, and then smash it with my finger. While this doesn't give you the same tubular slice that you would normally see with a checker, it did give me the idea of a checker. And to be honest, at this point, I did not know how else I could do this. So, if you have a suggestion, let me know. Maybe my blade just wasn't sharp enough to cut through the clay to keep the shape, or maybe I waited too long, maybe I tried too early. I tried very different stages of drying to see if maybe that was it, because it is air dry clay, and I thought maybe once it's dry a little bit, it'll keep its shape. No, it just crumbled. So rolled around little balls, smashed them with my finger, and that was my checkers. I know in my last video I had some trouble with this marker, but I'm gonna try and use it again. Normally I would paint all of this and then do this as the detail, but I know that once I paint over this, I'm gonna lose all of this grid, and I want the grid to be gold based on the one I'm using as reference. So I'm going to paint over all these grids with this, and then put down the base color, and then go back over this to make them stand out again. Also, doing this works because if for whatever reason this does mess up, I can just cover it with the paint I'm going to use for the actual color. So here's hoping it works. I started working on the grid, and to be honest, I think maybe I should have practiced more in my previous video before I used this, because I kind of did a little bit on a piece of paper off screen before I started this. And I do think that I have a better understanding of how to use the marker, that if you push down, it's almost like a Posca, where I guess it probably is the same kind of marker as a Posca, but if you push down, it releases a lot of paint. So you have to do it very gently if you want like a very fine line. And yeah, I'm glad that I figured that out finally. And while this grid isn't perfect, it's a lot better than my previous gold pen work. Then it came time to paint the grid, and this was an incredibly tedious thing to do. Oh, also, don't talk about my palette. We don't talk about my palette here. You don't judge my palette here. That's my palette. Don't talk about my palette. After all the red squares were done, I was starting to kind of think it looked like a pizza box or something, but have to trust the process, which is something I had to tell myself a lot during this project, because I kept being like, is this good? Is this not good enough? Do I need to change this? But I was trusting it and moving along. Because I already had the red paint out, I decided to paint the red checkers as well. This I had to hold down with tweezers because they kind of were moving around a lot. They're very, very light when they dry, and even with tweezers they were kind of flinging all over the place, so I had to do my best to just get these painted. Each red thing took 2 coats of paint, both the board and the checkers, just because it was it's not the thickest paint. It is a craft paint, so multiple layers just work better. I almost started painting with this, and it's a good thing I checked, because I poured it out thinking this was black, thought it was gray. It's deep midnight blue. Maybe check your colors. Don't rely on this if you are bad with color like me. The sad part is I was really struggling to find this, and how did I miss this? It's gigantic, and I somehow could not find it. At this point, I was less nervous about painting on the black. I was nervous at first because I thought if it bled over too much into the red, it's going to be harder to hide the black underneath another layer of red because it's a dark color. So I was a little nervous, but at this point, I kind of wasn't anymore. I just was going really slow, and I learned a good technique from the red portions that I thought that I could do this and not bleed over too much. And because the gold paint pen actually does go down pretty thick, I knew that if it did bleed over into the grid part, that I could actually cover it up pretty easily. So I painted all of these black, and this is what it was looking like. You can tell it's a little overdrawn, you know, the grid's a little messed up from the black and the red paint, but I knew this was going to happen. I knew from the very beginning, and that's why I put down the original one though, so I could use it as a base to put back the top layer of the gold paint pen. I'm confusing myself at this point, but I knew this was going to happen, so I used my original lines as a guide, and I redrew all the gold lines. And because I had the technique down better than I did the first time I did the guidelines, I actually liked the lines on the very top better, because the ones that were kind of bled out and too thick on the very first coat were covered up by the overcoloring of the black and the red squares. So I really end up liking the gold grid in the end. I really think I got the technique down, and I think I'll add this to my rotation going forward for other projects. Once all the checkers were dry, and the checkerboard was dry, and the guidelines were dry, and the black squares and the red squares and everything was dry, it was time to start gluing it all together. I did have to look up a checkerboard because I wasn't sure what colors do the different color checkers go on. Turns out they all go on the same color, otherwise how could they jump over each other? Yeah, I know, it's not chess. My pip hair growing up played a lot of chess, and so I know a lot more about chess than I do checkers, although checkers is a lot easier, I think. Don't come for me, checkers fans, but I know a lot about chess, and I did not know about checkers. I did not know how to set up a checkerboard, so I did have to Google that. After all the black checkers were glued down, I glued down the red checkers, and then I was done. And it was time to do the little music part where you get to just look at the project while I play some music for you. Here's the checkerboard. It's so tiny. I feel like it almost looks like a piece of gum. Like I should just chew it. I won't. A lot of paint, a lot of clay. Probably shouldn't chew this. But it looks like a piece of gum. What is that? Okay, I thought there was a piece of gum on the back. It's glue. Yeah. I'm happy with how this turned out. Is it the best thing I've ever made? No. But I think I learned a little bit about the technique on how to use that gold pen I used last week that I also use on this properly, because if you watched last week's video, I did not know how to use it correctly. And I think I maybe have it down now. Maybe. I'm at least learning. I'm at least getting better at it. So I'm really happy with this. I'm happy with how it turned out. I think that like if I were to make a room and this would be like in a diorama or a dollhouse or something, unless you're like looking at it really close, you're not going to notice the issues that I had with it, like the errors, the user error I had. In the background of a little, you're not even gonna notice, and it's just cute. I like it. I like how it turned out. That's that for that. It's so quiet sounding. Can you hear that? Just light little when I drop it. That's that for this week. Overall, I'm happy, and I'm excited to jump back into miniatures. My day job should be slowing down, so I'll have more time to jump back in and have my weekly uploads. Hopefully it's only the 1 week that I missed last week, and I won't miss any going forward. My goal is to actually like get ahead, so that way I always have a video coming out. Even if I do fall behind because of work, I'll always have a video in the pipeline. That makes sense? Yeah. I'm hoping to get that at some point. We'll see. Next week, no idea what I'm working on. I kind of have an idea. It depends. Again, there's something I want to work on, but I have to wait until it gets a little bit warmer because the stain has to be in like a certain temperature, and because I've never used it before, I want to try and follow the instructions properly. And it says that it has to cure like in like 60 degrees or something. I don't know. So we'll see. We'll see what I'm gonna work on next week. But until then, if you like me or you like miniatures, make sure you hit that subscribe button below, and I will see you all in my next video. Goodbye.